When flames threaten to destroy everything, an unexpected hero faces the impossible to protect what matters most. You won't believe what happens next. In the small town of Dreamport Harbor, nestled between mountains and the sea on the southern coast, the Miller family was living days of apparent tranquility. Emily, a talented pediatrician, and Brian, a respected architect in the region, had just received the greatest blessing of their lives, little Noah, a baby with deep blue eyes like the ocean that surrounded the town. The Millers' home, a modest but cozy construction, was located on a tree-lined street in a traditional neighborhood. What made that residence even more special was Max, a golden-haired Labrador who had joined the family 3 years earlier, rescued by Brian from abandonment. The dog had developed an unwavering loyalty to his owners and, since Noah's arrival, had assumed the role of tireless guardian of the baby. "I've never seen an animal so dedicated to a child," Emily commented to her best friend Jessica as they watched Max lying beside Noah's crib. "It's as if he knows he needs to protect him." "Animals have a sensitivity that we humans often don't understand," replied Jessica, smiling. What neither of them knew was that, on the other side of town, in an imposing mansion overlooking the Richard Hamilton was looking at old photographs in his private office. A successful businessman and influential figure in local politics, Richard hid behind his respectable facade, a heart corroded by resentment. "Sir, the investigator has brought the information you requested," announced Walter, his butler and confidant. For more than 20 years, Richard took the envelope and examined its contents, photographs of the Miller's house, arrival and departure times, daily routines. His eyes fixed particularly on a photo where Emily held Noah in her arms. "After all these years, I can finally settle the score," he muttered, storing the photos in the locked drawer of his desk. What connected Richard to Emily was a secret, buried more than a decade ago when they both worked at the same hospital. A covered-up medical error, a denied promotion, and a professional rivalry that turned into obsession. Now, with Emily building a perfect family, Richard's resentment had reached its limit. The following night, Emily and Brian needed to attend a charity dinner at the hospital where she worked. As usual, they called Amy, a trusted babysitter, to look after Noah. "Max seems agitated today," observed Amy, watching the dog pace back and forth in the living room. "He always gets like this when we leave," explained Brian. "Tomorrow we'll make it up to him by taking him for a walk on the beach." After putting Noah to sleep, Amy received an urgent call from her mother, who wasn't feeling well. She verified that the baby was sleeping soundly, that Max was alert as always, and decided to leave early, leaving a note for the couple informing them that the baby was fine and that she had to leave due to a family emergency. What no one could foresee was that that night would forever change the destiny of everyone involved. As the silent dawn advanced over Dreamport Harbor, a shadow moved stealthily around the back of the Miller's house, with a meticulously crafted plan to destroy everything Emily loved most. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The night in Dreamport Harbor was unusually cold for that time of year. Richard Hamilton drove his imported car through the deserted streets, parking at a strategic distance from the Miller's house. On his face, an impassive expression masked the storm of emotions consuming him from within. "Emily doesn't deserve the happiness she flaunts," he thought as he walked along the dark sidewalk. "She built her career at the expense of my ruin." What few knew was that 10 years ago, Emily had discovered inconsistencies in diagnoses signed by Richard, then head of the pediatrics department. The evidence pointed to serious medical negligence. When confronted, Richard tried to bribe her to keep quiet. Emily, however, took the case to the hospital board. Richard was temporarily removed, but his family prestige and political connections ensured the scandal was hushed up. He managed to rebuild himself as a businessman, while Emily took over his former position. Now, years later, resentment had transformed into obsession. In the silent house, Max immediately noticed the strange presence. His sharp instincts caught the unfamiliar scent approaching. The Labrador rose from the carpet, where he was resting near Noah's crib, and walked to the bedroom door, his ears alert. Richard took advantage of the unlocked back door, Amy's oversight, when leaving in a hurry, and entered the kitchen. In his hand, a small device he had carefully planned, an adaptation that would cause a short circuit in the house's electrical system, causing a fire that would appear accidental. "This is just the beginning of my revenge," he whispered, positioning the device near the exposed wiring under the kitchen sink. Upstairs, Max began to bark. Something was wrong. The dog could sense the imminent danger, although he didn't understand its nature. He ran downstairs, guided by a protective instinct that transcended any training. Richard heard the barking and hurried. He hadn't counted on the dog's presence. He activated the device and quickly headed for the exit. However, before he could reach the door, Max appeared in the hallway, his fur bristling and teeth showing, blocking his path. "Get out of the way." "Stupid animal," hissed Richard, trying to circumvent the Labrador. Max advanced, determined to protect his territory and family. In the kitchen, small sparks began to emerge from the compromised electrical installation, quickly finding flammable material in the nearby curtains. The confrontation between man and animal was brief but intense. Richard managed to break free and escape through the front door, leaving behind an agitated and confused Max, torn between pursuing the intruder or remaining in the house where the danger was growing. In the living room, the first flames were already licking the walls. The fire alarm system, which should have triggered, remained silent. Another part of Richard's meticulous plan had included deactivating the sensors. Max turned his attention to the interior of the house, where the smell of smoke was becoming increasingly strong. His instincts compelled him to climb the stairs, to return to the room where Noah slept, oblivious to the approaching danger. Meanwhile, at the charity dinner, Emily felt an inexplicable uneasiness. The champagne glass in her hand trembled slightly as she watched the wall clock. "Has something happened?" asked Brian, noticing her worried expression. "I can't explain," she replied, placing the glass on the table. "I have a strange feeling, like we need to go home now." "It's just first-time mum anxiety," Brian smiled, trying to reassure her. "Amy is responsible and Max is there too." Emily forced a smile, but the discomfort persisted. In her mind, confused images from the past mixed with a dark premonition about the present, as if something that had been dormant for years was finally awakening. In the miller's house, the fire was quickly gaining strength. The flames, fed by the synthetic material of the curtains and furniture, were transforming the kitchen into a growing inferno. The thick smoke began to rise up the stairs, infiltrating through the cracks in the door of the room where Noah slept. Max, with his instinct sharpened by danger, raced up the stairs. The heat increased with each step conquered. Upon reaching the second-floor corridor, he encountered clouds of smoke that made breathing difficult. Even so, the Labrador determinedly followed to the door of the baby's room. To his desperation, the door was closed. Amy, following Emily's instructions to keep the room isolated from external noises, had closed the door when leaving. Max scratched the wood with growing desperation, barking and howling, as if trying to alert little Noah to the danger. Inside the room, the baby began to cough, bothered by the smoke entering through the cracks. His delicate lungs reacted to the contaminated air with spasms that soon turned into crying. Max intensified his efforts, throwing himself against the door repeatedly. The wood, already old, began to give way under the impact of the Labrador's heavy body. After several charges, the lock broke and the door opened. The dog quickly entered, finding the room already partially filled with smoke. Noah was crying in the crib, his little face red from the effort and the irritation caused by the toxic air. Max approached, barking softly, as if trying to calm the child. Carefully, he grabbed the blanket covering the baby with his teeth and pulled it to the edge of the crib. At the charity dinner, Emily's uneasiness turned into real panic. Suddenly, she stood up, accidentally knocking over the water glass on the table. "We need to go home now," she said firmly, looking at Brian. "Emily, what happened?" he asked, alarmed by the sudden change in his wife's behavior. "I can't explain. It's Noah. I feel he's in danger." Brian knew his wife's strong maternal instinct well and didn't question it. Within minutes they were in the car, driving at high speed through the town streets. Emily tried to call Amy, but the babysitter wasn't answering. "Try calling the neighbors," suggested Brian while making a sharp turn. Emily dialed Mrs. Mitchell, an elderly lady who lived next door. After 3 rings, the neighbor's sleepy voice answered. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Emily. Please, could you check if everything is all right at our house? We have a bad feeling." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "My God, Emily." "There's smoke coming from your house. I can see it through the second-floor windows." Emily's heart stopped for a second. Brian, hearing the conversation on speakerphone, pressed the accelerator even deeper. "We're calling the fire department," shouted Mrs. Mitchell before hanging up. In the burning house, Max faced his greatest challenge. The stairs were already partially blocked by fire, making it impossible to exit that way. The Labrador, acting on pure instinct, dragged the blanket with Noah wrapped in it closer to the window. With his muzzle, he pushed the window lever until he managed to open it. The fresh, night air invaded the room, providing momentary relief. Max looked down. There was a considerable drop to the lawn in the garden. Even so, it was the only chance for salvation. The Labrador returned to the crib, where Noah continued crying. With extreme delicacy, he grabbed the collar of the baby's pajamas with his teeth and carefully lifted him. Noah's small body hung from the dog's mouth as Max mentally calculated the best way to execute what needed to be done. On the street, sirens announced the approach of firefighters. Emily and Brian arrived almost simultaneously, stopping their car abruptly in front of the house. What they saw froze their hearts, flames escaping through the first-floor windows while dense black smoke rose to the night sky. "Noah!" Emily's desperate scream tore through the night silence, while Brian had to hold her to prevent her from running into the burning house. The firefighters arrived quickly, deploying equipment and hoses with military precision. Lieutenant Rodriguez, a veteran of countless rescues, took command of the operation. "We have a baby on the second floor," informed Brian, his voice trembling with desperation. "And our dog, Max," added Emily, tears streaming down her face. "Please, save them." While the rescue team prepared to enter the house, something extraordinary happened. In the window of Noah's room, Max's silhouette appeared against the orange background of the flames. The Labrador was holding something small and fragile between his teeth. It was Noah wrapped in his blue blanket. "My God!" exclaimed Mrs. Mitchell, who had come out to the street like several other neighbors. "The dog has the baby." All eyes turned to the surreal scene. Max seemed to be calculating the distance to the lawn below. His breathing was labored, his eyes watered from the smoke, but the determination in his gaze was unwavering. The firefighters quickly positioned a rescue tarp stretched out below the window. Lieutenant Rodriguez used a megaphone. "Keep the tarp tight, prepare for impact." Max observed the movement below. As if understanding what was happening, the Labrador jumped from the window with a decisive movement, holding Noah with firmness. But gentleness. Time seemed to freeze during those seconds of fall. The impact was cushioned by the stretched tarp. Max and Noah landed safely, immediately surrounded by firefighters and paramedics. Emily ran toward her son, taking him in her arms while doctors were already assessing his condition. "He's breathing normally," announced one of the paramedics, to everyone's relief. "He seems to have inhaled a bit of smoke, but there are no signs of burns or other injuries." Brian, meanwhile, knelt beside Max. The Labrador was lying on the grass, exhausted, with soot stains on his golden fur and small cuts on his paws. His eyes, however, did not leave Noah. "You're a hero, buddy," whispered Brian, carefully hugging the dog to avoid hurting his wounds. Ambulances transported Noah, Emily, and Max to the municipal hospital. The house remained in flames, but firefighters managed to control the fire before it spread to neighboring homes. Lieutenant Rodriguez initiated a preliminary investigation into the causes of the fire. "It seems to have started in the kitchen," he explained to Brian, who remained at the scene. "There are indications of a short circuit, but some aspects are unusual." "What do you mean, unusual?" asked Brian, intrigued. "The fire alarm system was disabled, and the fire propagation pattern Suggests a very specific point of origin, replied the firefighter, frowning. We'll need a more detailed investigation. At the hospital, Emily didn't leave the bed where Noah rested, breathing with the aid of a small oxygen mask. The doctors assured that he would recover completely, without sequelae. In an adjacent room, veterinarians were taking care of Max, treating the cuts on his paws and administering medication for smoke inhalation. The next morning, while the Miller family was still processing the trauma of the previous night, a figure observed the hospital from inside a car parked on the opposite sidewalk. Richard Hamilton clenched his fists as he read the headline in the local newspaper. Hero dog saves baby from fire in Dreamport Harbor. His plan had failed, but his determination remained unwavering. Now he would need a new strategy to reach Emily. He started the car and drove away, his mind already working on alternatives. At the hospital, Amy arrived in tears, consumed by guilt for having left the house before the employer's return. "I'll never forgive myself," she sobbed, hugging Emily. "If I had stayed." "You could have been hurt too," consoled Emily, holding the young woman's hands. "No one could have predicted what happened." "How is Noah?" asked Amy, looking at the sleeping baby. "He'll be fine, thanks to Max," replied Emily, a weak smile illuminating her exhausted face. "He saved our son." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. 2 weeks after the fire, the Miller family temporarily moved into Jessica's house, Emily's best friend. The official fire department investigation had concluded that a short circuit in the kitchen wiring had caused the fire, but Lieutenant Rodriguez remained intrigued by certain inconsistencies in the flame pattern. "We found residues of an accelerator material near the point of origin," he explained to Brian during a visit to the partially destroyed house. "This is not common in accidental fires." "Are you suggesting it was intentional?" asked Brian, feeling a shiver run down his spine. "We can't categorically state that, but we're investigating this possibility," replied the firefighter seriously. Brian decided not to share this information with Emily immediately. She was already too fragile with everything that had happened. However, a new element emerged when Mrs. Mitchell appeared at Jessica's house that afternoon. "Emily, dear, I forgot to mention something important," said the elderly neighbor, settling in the living room. "On the night of the fire, shortly before, noticing the smoke, I saw a car parked near your house. A man got out and walked toward the back. I thought it was strange, but as it was dark, I couldn't see his face." "Did you mention this to the police?" asked Brian, alarmed. "Yes, just yesterday. They showed me some photographs, but I didn't recognize anyone," replied Mrs. Mitchell, absently petting Max, who was recovering well from his injuries. Emily felt an inexplicable chill. The mention of a stranger near the house on the night of the fire awakened an old fear that she had kept buried for years. That night, while Brian and Jessica prepared dinner, Emily took the opportunity to investigate her own suspicions. She opened her laptop and accessed old emails stored in an encrypted folder. There were the evidences she had gathered years ago against Richard Hamilton: falsified diagnoses, altered medical prescriptions, manipulated medical records. Could it be possible, she thought, feeling her heart accelerate. After so much time? Her reflections were interrupted by the telephone ringing. It was Sandra, head nurse at the hospital where Emily worked. "Emily, something strange happened today," said Sandra, her voice tense. "Someone tried to access the confidential files of the Hamilton case from 10 years ago. The system recorded the intrusion attempt." Emily's blood froze. That folder contained the original evidence she had presented to the hospital board, resulting in Richard's temporary removal. "Sandra, you need to strengthen the security of those files," Emily asked, her voice trembling. "And please don't comment about this with anyone." After hanging up, Emily felt observed. She walked to the window and checked the street, nothing suspicious in sight. Even so, the feeling of vulnerability persisted. The next day, Brian went to the bank to deal with the house insurance. In the queue, he met Walter, the longtime butler of the Hamilton family. "Mr. Miller, my condolences for what happened," said the man with apparent sincerity. "Such a tragedy should not happen to anyone." Brian thanked him for the gesture, but noticed something peculiar in the butler's gaze. a mixture of guilt and apprehension. "Have you known Dr. Hamilton for a long time?" asked Walter almost casually. "Actually, no," replied Brian, intrigued. "I only know him by sight from social events. My wife worked with him in the past." "I understand," muttered Walter, seeming hesitant. "Perhaps you should ask your wife about that period. Some stories deserve to be known." Before Brian could question the meaning of that enigmatic insinuation, Walter said goodbye and hurriedly left the bank. Upon returning to Jessica's house, Brian found Emily playing with Noah in the garden. Max was resting nearby, vigilant as always. The scene of family happiness contrasted with the dark suspicions beginning to form in his mind. "Emily," he called, sitting beside his wife, "we need to talk about Richard Hamilton." Emily's expression changed instantly. Her face paled and her hands began to tremble. How do you know about this?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "His butler approached me today. He said something about stories from the past that deserve to be known, and the firefighters found evidence that the fire might not have been accidental." Emily looked at her son and at Max, as if assessing the danger surrounding them. After a long silence, she made a decision. 10 years ago, I discovered that Richard was falsifying diagnoses to receive commissions from pharmaceutical companies. When I confronted him, he threatened my career, my reputation. I had to take the case forward." Brian listened attentively, beginning to understand the magnitude of the situation. He was temporarily removed, but his family has power. The case was hushed up, and he rebuilt his life as a businessman, continued Emily. "I thought it had stayed in the past, but now you believe he might be behind the fire," completed Brian, feeling a wave of fury growing inside him. "We can't simply accuse Richard without concrete evidence," pondered Brian, as they walked through Jessica's garden the following morning. "He's influential and powerful." "I know that better than anyone," replied Emily, adjusting Noah in her arms. "When I reported his unethical practices 10 years ago, I faced the power of the Hamilton family. It was an uneven battle." What they didn't know was that at that exact moment, an important conversation was taking place at Richard's mansion. Walter, after decades of loyalty, was facing a crisis of conscience. "Sir, I can no longer participate in this," declared the butler, standing before Richard's desk. "One thing is to cover up dubious business dealings. Something completely different is to attempt against the life of an innocent baby." Richard rose slowly, his face a mask of calculated coldness. "After all these years, Walter, you choose now to develop scruples?" he asked sarcastically. "Need I remind you how many of your secrets I've also kept?" The butler paled but remained firm. "This time you've gone too far. That dog, that animal, showed more humanity than you." Richard came around the desk and approached dangerously. "Be careful with your words, old friend. Broken loyalty comes at a high price." Walter took a step back, then straightened, as if making a final decision. "I'm leaving today, and if anything happens to that family again, know that I have documents stored in a safe place that prove your involvement in the fire." Before Richard could respond, the butler left the office. Alone, the businessman punched the desk forcefully, knocking objects over. His plan had failed, and now his longtime accomplice was threatening to betray him. He needed to act quickly. At the Dreamport Harbor Police Station, Lieutenant Rodriguez was speaking with Sheriff Thompson about the findings from the fire investigation. "The evidence is circumstantial but consistent," explained the firefighter. "The device we found couldn't have been created by a common short circuit." "Do you have any suspect in mind?" asked the sheriff, browsing through the report. Dr. Miller mentioned a possible adversary, Richard Hamilton. They had professional problems in the past. The sheriff frowned, thoughtful. "Hamilton is practically untouchable in this town. We'll need very solid evidence before even mentioning him as a suspect." Meanwhile, Brian decided to act. He arranged a meeting with Walter at a discreet cafe in the town center. The butler appeared visibly nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. "We don't have much time," he said, sitting down. "I'm leaving town today, but first I need to tell you what I know." "Why are you doing this?" asked Brian, suspicious. I've served the Hamilton family for almost 3 decades. I watched Richard grow up, become a respected doctor, and then transform into the man he is today. But there are limits I cannot allow to be crossed. Walter explained in detail how Richard had planned and executed the fire, driven by an obsessive desire for revenge against Emily. He handed Brian a flash drive. Here are copies of emails, recorded conversations, and the project for the incendiary device he commissioned. It's enough to incriminate him. Brian could hardly believe what he was hearing. His first impulse was to run to the police station, but Walter stopped him. Be careful. Richard has contacts in the police. He's already suspecting my loyalty and will soon discover this meeting. That afternoon, Emily received an unexpected call on her cell phone. The deep voice on the other end made her blood freeze. "Hello, Emily. It's been a long time," said Richard with false cordiality. "I heard about the terrible accident at your house. What a tragedy it would be if something happened to your precious son, or that heroic dog." "What do you want, Richard?" asked Emily, trying to keep her voice steady while signaling to Brian, who had just entered the room. "I want what has always been rightfully mine, your public admission that you falsified the evidence against me 10 years ago, that you ruined my medical career out of envy and ambition." "That will never happen," Emily replied with determination. "I have the original evidence safely stored." "Then I suggest you reconsider, for the love of your family. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the beach lookout. Come alone." The Kai. Call ended abruptly. Emily reported the conversation to Brian, who immediately showed her the flash drive received from Walter. "We have the evidence against him, Emily. We can end this once and for all." Max, who was resting near Noah's crib, suddenly stood up and went to the window, barking at something outside. Brian carefully pulled back the curtain and glimpsed a black car parked across the street. He couldn't identify the driver, but he was certain they were being watched. "We need a plan," said Emily, protectively hugging Noah. "He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Brian thought for a few moments, then picked up the phone. "I'm going to call Lieutenant Rodriguez. Maybe it's time to trust the authorities, and we also need to talk to Jessica. If we're being watched, we'll need her help for what I have in mind." Emily nodded, stroking Max's fur. "This time Richard won't escape unpunished," she promised, a new determination shining in her eyes. The Dreamport Harbor Beach Lookout offered a panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean. It was a tourist spot during the day, but at that hour of the afternoon, with storm clouds approaching the horizon, it was practically deserted. Emily arrived punctually at 3 p.m. as Richard had demanded. Dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, she seemed vulnerable and alone, exactly as the plan required. She walked to the railing, pretending to admire the view while waiting. The marine wind agitated her hair, bringing the smell of imminent rain. Richard appeared 10 minutes later, impeccably dressed in a grey suit. His smile exuded absolute confidence as he approached. "Punctual as always, Emily," he commented, positioning himself beside her. "I've always admired that quality in you." "Let's get straight to the point, Richard," she replied, turning to face him. "What exactly do you want?" Richard took a folded document from his pocket and extended it to her. "A signed confession, admitting that you falsified evidence against me 10 years ago, motivated by professional jealousy and refusal of my personal propositions." Emily examined the document, disguising her contempt. "This would destroy my career." "Precisely," smiled Richard. "Poetic justice, don't you think? You ruined my medical career, I ruin yours." "And if I refuse to sign?" Richard's smile disappeared, replaced by a cold and calculating expression. "Then I can't guarantee your family's safety. Accidents happen, Emily. The first fire was just a warning." "So you admit it?" she asked, maintaining her composure. "You admit that you caused the fire that almost killed my son?" "Let's say I was disappointed with the result," replied Richard, observing the sea. "That stupid dog interrupted my plans. An irrational animal demonstrated more loyalty than many humans." Emily breathed deeply, trying to control the anger growing inside her. The plan depended on her ability to keep Richard talking. "Why now, Richard?" After so many years? Because you have everything I should have, he exploded, revealing for the first time the intensity of his resentment. A respectable career, a perfect family, public admiration, while I had to rebuild my life from scratch, away from medicine, treated like a pariah in circles that once respected me. You brought this upon yourself when you decided to falsify diagnoses and prescribe unnecessary medications for money, replied Emily, her voice now firm. I was just fulfilling my ethical duty. Richard took a step in her direction, his eyes flashing with hatred. Sign the document, Emily, or next time not even that heroic dog will be able to save your precious son. It was at that moment that the plan went into action. From different points of the lookout, Lieutenant Rodriguez, Sheriff Thompson, and 2 officers appeared. At the same time, Brian emerged from his hiding place behind a concrete structure, holding a small recorder. I think we've heard enough, declared the sheriff, approaching with handcuffs in hand. Richard turned pale, realizing he had fallen into a trap. He looked around, seeking an escape route, but was surrounded. You have nothing against me, he tried to argue, backing away. It's her word against mine. Brian stepped forward, displaying the recorder and the flash drive received from Walter. Actually, we have much more than that. Your butler provided detailed documents about the planning of the fire, and now we have your own confession recorded. Richard's face contorted into a mask of fury. With an unexpected movement, he grabbed Emily by the shoulders, pulling her dangerously against the lookout railing. Below them, the waves broke violently against the rocks. If I fall, she comes with me, he shouted, desperate. Lieutenant Rodriguez and Brian froze, fearing any sudden movement. It was at this critical moment that a familiar bark echoed through the lookout. Max, whom Brian had brought hidden as part of the plan, advanced quickly. The Labrador didn't attack Richard directly. Instead, he positioned himself between him and Emily, creating a protective barrier, his eyes fixed on the aggressor, his fur bristling, his posture unequivocally defensive. The momentary distraction was enough for Emily to break free from Richard's grip. In the next instant, the officers immobilized him against the ground, handcuffing his wrists. Richard Hamilton, you're under arrest for attempted murder, threat, extortion, and property damage, announced the sheriff formally, as the officers led the businessman to the police car parked near the lookout. Emily knelt beside Max, hugging the Labrador with tears in her eyes. Once again, you saved me, she whispered as Brian joined the embrace. You're much more than an animal. You're part of our family. The rain finally began to fall, washing the lookout and marking the end of a dark chapter in the Millers' lives. As they walked back to the car, protected by an umbrella that Lieutenant Rodriguez had kindly offered, Emily felt an enormous weight being removed from her shoulders. Is it over? She asked Brian, still unsure. It's over, he confirmed, squeezing her hand affectionately. He can no longer threaten us. Max walked beside them, apparently satisfied with the outcome of the situation. His protective instinct had been decisive, once again. On the horizon, between the storm clouds, a ray of sunlight managed to break through the darkness, a presage of better days to come. 1 year passed since the events at the lookout. The Miller family was inaugurating their new home, built on the same plot as the old one, but with a completely different design. Brian's work, which incorporated security and accessibility elements without sacrificing the coziness of home. The garden, larger than before, became Noah's favorite space, now almost 2 years old. The boy was taking his first hesitant steps on the green grass, always under the watchful eye of Max, who had aged with dignity. The Labrador's golden fur now displayed some white hairs around his muzzle, marks of wisdom gained over time. The inauguration party gathered close friends and family. Jessica helped Emily serve canapés, while Brian showed the architectural details of the house to Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had become a friend of the family after the traumatic events of the previous year. The alarm system is directly connected to the fire department, explained Brian, showing the digital panel disguised in a wall, and we installed smoke detectors in every room. Excellent precaution, approved the lieutenant, though I hope you never need them. In a quieter corner of the garden, Mrs. Mitchell watched Noah play with Max. The boy threw a colorful ball that the dog patiently retrieved, bringing it back with an almost palpable pride. "It's amazing how they connected, isn't it?" commented the elderly woman when Emily approached with a glass of juice, "as if they were souls destined to meet." Emily smiled, observing her son and the dog. "Max is more than a pet to us. After everything we've been through, he's truly part of the family." The mention of past events inevitably led her thoughts to Richard. After a trial that received extensive coverage in the local media, he had been sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted murder and other crimes. The fall of the powerful businessman had shocked Dreamport Harbor's society, especially when all the details of his unethical actions as a doctor came to light during the process. "Any news from Walter?" asked Mrs. Mitchell, as if reading her. "Thoughts?" "We received a postcard from the Northeast a few months ago," replied Emily. "He seems to be doing well, rebuilding his life away from here. His testimony was fundamental for Richard's conviction." The conversation was interrupted by Amy, who approached with Noah in her arms. The boy had grown strong and healthy, without any sequelae from the trauma he experienced as a baby. "Dr. Miller, I think someone needs a nap," smiled the babysitter, who continued working for the family. "He played so much with Max that he's falling asleep." Emily took her son in her arms, feeling the warmth of his small body and the calm rhythm of his breathing. Noah was already falling asleep, clutching his stuffed rabbit. "I'll put him to bed," she said, heading inside the house. In Noah's new room, decorated with marine themes, Emily carefully laid her son in the crib. Max, who had silently followed her, settled beside it, his habitual guardian position. Even after so much time, the Labrador remained vigilant, as if understanding the preciousness of the life he had helped save. Emily caressed the dogs, Fur observing the scene for a few moments. The relationship between Noah and Max transcended conventional understanding. It was a bond forged in danger, consolidated in daily life, and nurtured by the unconditional love that only animals seem capable of offering without reservations. "Thank you for choosing us, friend," she whispered, kissing the top of the Labrador's head. Back in the garden, Emily found Brian talking with Jessica. Seeing her, he extended his arm, inviting her to join. "I was just telling Jessica about our plans for the NGO," explained Brian, as Emily settled beside him. "The hero dogs?" asked Jessica, interested. "Have you started implementing it?" Emily nodded, enthusiastic. "We just received approval for the initial funding. We're going to rescue abandoned dogs, train them, and donate them to families with special children or in vulnerable situations." "Inspired by Max, naturally," added Brian, the pride evident in his voice. "It's a wonderful idea," exclaimed Jessica. "Transforming a traumatic experience into something so positive, that's true resilience." The sun was beginning to set, bathing the garden in a golden light that resembled Max's fur. Guests gradually said their goodbyes, leaving behind only the most intimate core of friends. When the last visitor departed, Emily and Brian sat on the new porch, contemplating the sky that was being tinged with orange and purple tones. The silence between them was comfortable, laden with gratitude for the second chance life had granted them. "You know what impresses me most about this whole story?" reflected Brian, holding Emily's hand between his. "How a being that doesn't reason like us, was capable of the most profound act of love." Emily rested her head on her husband's shoulder, watching Max, who was returning to join them after checking on Noah in his room, his habitual routine. "Maybe that's exactly why," she replied softly. "Because true love doesn't need words or logical explanations. It simply exists and manifests in the purest actions." The Labrador settled at their feet, exhausted but visibly satisfied. In the miller's new home, surrounded by the twilight announcing a tranquil night, the family finally found their safe harbor, not in walls and ceilings, but in the unwavering bond that united them. And as the first stars appeared in the Dreamport harbor sky, Max peacefully fell asleep, his canine dreams populated by memories of courage and unconditional love, elements that had transformed a simple dog into an unforgettable hero for all who knew his story. If this story interested you, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from.